that you're proposing on tip workers to the billionaires? Why not make the tax cuts for billionaires temporary like you are for tip workers? If you really care about working people like you claim, then why not prioritize them over the benefits of billionaires? I'll tell you why. Because you're screwing America with this bill. Your priorities are about favoring Donald Trump. He cares about one person, himself, and his billionaire donors. And what is so enraging to me is that my constituents are going to pay the price. All of our constituents are going to pay the price because they're cutting on the backs of the American people to give tax cuts to the very wealthy, and all in the result will also add more than $3 trillion to our federal debt that we're all going to pay for. But guess what? The people still have the power in this. And so my message is simple. We do need to stand up. We have to speak up. We have to fight back. That is part of our responsibility as their representatives. And my constituents know that I'm going to keep fighting for them over the billionaire class every single day.
Representative Crowe.
Yeah, thank you. And further to that point, I worked 2 jobs putting myself through college. I was a Pell Grant student, was on the TRIO program, and was the first in my family to graduate from college and had opportunity. And I worked as a waitress before they raised the tipped wage to $2.13. And I can tell you, never once did I itemize my taxes. Because when you're making that kind of money, you don't itemize your taxes, you take the standard deduction. So all this no tax on tips, it really doesn't work for normal people who use the standard deduction. So it's just a talking point. And my constituents, the constituents who are going to lose their jobs in my rural communities, who are working on the wind farms, who are working on the infrastructure projects that just got canceled, who work in tourism, because tourism has really gone downhill because of tariffs and because international visitors are afraid to come to the United States. So our tourism industry is being crushed. All of those people can't eat a talking point. They can't pay their rent with a talking point. They can't buy birthday presents for their kids with a talking point. So that's all this is a talking point. But still, we got the richest 1% that are going to get. They're going to make bank. I think trickle-down cruelty is probably the best way I've ever heard to describe it. And we all know it has been proven over and over again. Trickle-down economics doesn't work for working people. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. Again, I think we have to make this clear. That is a talking point, and that's all it is.
So, and Representative Chantel and Representative Torres, you also pointed out, and I know that from your very different perspectives in the communities you represent, why this doesn't make sense, and your amendments are needed to fix this bill, right? And what's interesting is Senator Murkowski wants us to fix, even though she could have voted no, and we'd be done and we'd be home, right? But no, she had to send it over to us. But so many of the representatives, when we sent it over there, they said, oh, would you fix it over there in the Senate? Well, they didn't fix it, they made it worse. So our amendments would fix it. And Representative Torres, Representative Chantel, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more to that discussion.
The only thing that I would add to this discussion is it's compiling of injustice, where we have tariffs, where we have terrorizing ICE raids in the community, violently beating up hardworking people at their workplace, storming into work facilities. While all of that is happening, children that need to feel safe in their school don't feel safe in their school. Grants are being canceled to our local governments because of this hateful agenda against the state that pays for your constituents to have a meal on their table. Because California is a donor state. And while you cancel our grants, how do we respond to the need to have running water in school, to fill the potholes? Californians are not shy about taxing themselves. They pass local bonds, local taxes. It's not the state legislature that is passing these taxes. It's the citizens themselves that want to see better schools, that want to see better access to public libraries, that decide to tax themselves. And how does the federal government respond to that? You continue to punish the state by refusing to provide an exemption for state and local taxes, SALT. I mean, that is an assault on working families. Already, that our insurance, fire insurance rates have gone up so high, the cost of living has gone up so high, and on top of that, you can't even have an exemption for the local taxes that you're having to pay to fulfill the failure of the federal government fulfilling their promise to provide our grants and to return our money back to California.
Representative Chantel?
Thank you. I think when you talk about kicking families off and increasing their work requirements, when work requirements already exist, these are really more paperwork requirements, as we've talked about. And ultimately, at the end of the day, and I'll be very brief, this bill is going to make people poorer, sicker, and increase their debt, period.
That's what it is, and when California says it's a donor state, New Mexico is not a donor state, I will say, but it was $83 billion in 2022 that you sent that you did not receive. Thank you, I yield back.
Tell people, if you'll let me tell you, we have Representative McGarvey, Representative Scott from Virginia, Representative Min, Representative Delaney, Representative Crockett, Representative Supermoya, Representative Sewell, and Representative Liccardo. And if you'll come in the line, it would be helpful. First seat over here. I don't see Representative Scott. Is he here?
I don't see Bobby Scott. Yeah, I don't either. Should we get Mr. Johnson? Yeah. I don't see Bobby Scott, so I would announce Johnson, Mr. Johnson from Georgia.
Johnson?
From Georgia.
Oh, well, how about we do Suzanne?
Well,
No, okay. They gave you the list?
yeah.
Okay. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia, would you come and take Mr. Scott's place? Well, that's all right. If you guys just scoot down, just, if you don't mind, scoot down. You got it? Oh, well, never mind. You're all members of Congress. Come on. Whew. Okay. Most of you have been here. You know the drill. We ask that you submit your written comments for the record, and I ask that you keep your comments to 5 minutes. And if you get asked questions by the panel members, answer them in a short way. Thank you very much. We'll start with you, Mr. McGarvey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This budget hurts people. Kids, families, seniors, veterans, young and old, and for what? so that the richest 0.1% of Americans can pay less in taxes, and while they're driving our nation's debt up by $3.3 trillion to do so. It's wrong, it's cruel, and it's a choice. Republicans wrote it this way. That's why I'm offering 3 amendments. 1, to protect rural hospitals. 2, to keep our veterans from going hungry. And 3, to ensure our healthcare costs don't go up. This budget will hurt rural Americans everywhere, but it punishes the people in my state of Kentucky the most. If this bill passes, over 133,000 rural Kentuckians will lose their health care, more than any state in the country. 35 rural hospitals will close, more than any state in the country. Kentucky will lose $10 billion in rural Medicaid reimbursements, more than any state in the country, all while losing over 20,000 healthcare jobs. And it's easy to picture what happens next. All of a sudden, when something goes wrong, you know this is going to happen. When your parent has a heart attack, when your kid is in an accident, when your wife goes into premature labor, when minutes matter, when driving an extra 30 minutes is literally the difference between life and death. It isn't just people on Medicaid. These cuts hurt all of us. They mean worse care, longer waits, and higher prices for everyone. They are cruel and they are wrong. My second amendment is simple. It keeps the Republicans from jacking up your healthcare costs. This bill actually forces states to impose copays and other out-of-pocket costs on you, the patient. How much more? A lot. People in Kentucky who get their care through Connect could pay an extra $542 a year. If you have chronic conditions, that could go up to $1,200 a year just to stay alive. Last night, I had a town hall in Louisville, Kentucky on Medicaid. I heard from people who were already stretched to the breaking point. A mom named Betsy told me a story about her adult son who has chronic conditions. He said, if this bill passes, is it easier for me to just die? I heard from other people who are skipping their meds, who are delaying care, who are scared to check the mail just for another medical bill. Now Republicans want to raise our health care costs even more, not for better care or more coverage, but to bankroll another tax break for the ultra-rich. It's disgusting. I offer my final amendment with this simple principle in mind, that our veterans should not have to fight one more battle, especially for food. Veterans don't just serve, they sacrifice. Time with their families, their health, potentially their lives. And when they come home, our obligations to them are not optional. This amendment ensures that no veteran will endure the Republicans' burdensome new red tape when they're hungry. Because for someone who's already served our country to have to prove themselves again in order to eat, that's not accountability. It's absurd. A budget is a moral document. It's not just a statement of what we value, it's a reflection of who we value. I value the people who are counting on hospitals in their rural community for care. I value people who can't afford higher copays. I value the people who put on a uniform to keep us safe and keeping them from going hungry. That's who I'm fighting for. Not the billionaires, not the ultra-rich who already have enough and are about to get an additional tax break, but for the Americans who truly make this country great. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on these common sense amendments, and I yield back.
Representative Mann, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. I've sat and listened to a lot of this debate and heard a lot of the back and forth around the Medicaid cuts, the cuts to food banks. But, you know, as I step back and recall the origins of how this bill came to be, I remember back to January 20th, and it started with a discussion of waste, fraud, and abuse. It started with DOGE. And the reality is, if Elon Musk had found $2 trillion in cuts in waste, fraud, and abuse, we wouldn't be talking about cuts to Medicaid. We wouldn't be talking about cuts to food stamps or SNAP. The reality is we're talking about these massive cuts because the goal of this bill was never about waste, fraud, and abuse. It was never about putting able-bodied people on Medicaid. It has always been about an immoral tax giveaway to the richest people in the world. And I just want to note that the last TCJA in 2017 was estimated to give $350 billion to foreign investors, not even American investors, foreign investors, because the way it was structured, giving benefits to pass-through entities like corporations and private equity funds. That is what we're talking about right now. We're talking about massive cuts. So when Republicans claim, oh, this is not going to kick anybody off Medicaid, I don't believe them, because that was never their goal. They don't really care about what this does to Medicaid. They care about what this does as far as finding a pay-for their giant tax cuts. And so when I talk to my hospitals, when I talk to my healthcare providers in my district, I have the same stories we've heard throughout. Our hospitals will close. Our pediatrics departments will close. Quality of care will go down. People that are struggling right now to find care are worried that they will die. And that is the reality in districts across America right now. And that is what is happening with this horrendous abomination of a bill that is the most immoral bill I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I will just note that while our families are struggling across this country, what this effectively means is that if Jeff Bezos decides to get a divorce, marriage doesn't work out, he can get married like 10 more times and have 10 more weddings like the one he just had, all on the dime of American taxpayers. That's what this is about. Immoral. Now, I've got 7 amendments. I will try to briefly go through them. They're more targeted. I've got 3 relating to the environment. The first is number 76, oil and gas financial assurances. And this bill amendment would prevent the ugly bill from reducing oil and gas royalty rates until there's a full accounting of the industry's untold environmental liabilities. We know that big oil has gotten away with a ton of liabilities that they're leaving on the backs of taxpayers, including off the coast of California, which I represent. And what this bill would do is ensure accountability for the oil industry. My second amendment, number 114, wind and solar in national energy policy, would prohibit the Secretary of the Interior from conducting any fossil fuel lease sales under this bill until the Trump administration's national energy policy no longer discriminates against wind and solar energy. If Republicans are honest about their claiming that they want an all-of-the-above approach to energy, we should not be getting rid of the cheapest and most effective forms of energy, particularly when they're already online. Adding penalties of the kind that this ugly bill purports to do kneecaps us. And it kneecaps us in a way that is backward-looking, not forward-looking. Everyone around the world knows that the economy of the future is going to be built on clean energy, not fossil fuels. We could be investing in 8-tracks and beta, VHS players and the fax machine as well, but that would be terrible economic policy. By doubling down on fossil fuels and abandoning the clean energy economy of the future and ceding it to China, we are making a huge economic mistake, a huge foreign policy mistake, because this is a national security matter as well. And at the very least, we ought to make sure that the playing field is level. My third amendment is number 160, fitness to operate for offshore drilling. And this amendment would establish a fitness to operate standard and prohibit offshore oil and gas leases from being awarded to companies with outstanding environmental liabilities, previous noncompliance with federal laws and regulations, or those that lack the means to mitigate environmental risks. Too often, offshore leases are resold to wildcat companies that are not able to pay for the liabilities that are incurred. We've seen this happen time after time off the coast of California. They leave taxpayers holding the bill. They declare bankruptcy, give dividends right before then. We need to put a stop to that. This amendment would effectively hold those oil companies accountable. Number 197, this amendment would block federal funding for special government employees in DOGE, including former employees like Elon Musk, until the Departments of the Interior, Agriculture, and Commerce determine that these individuals have not violated financial conflicts of interest law. We have seen too many people playing too fast and loose with the rules. We don't have any full accounting or transparency, whether Elon Musk or Big Balls or any of the other people associated with DOGE have actually complied with the rules that they're supposed to comply with. Do they have conflicts of interest? Have they cut spending in ways that, or reallocated spending in ways that have benefited their own pecuniary interests? We don't know the answers to that. It's about damn time we figure this out. This is a question of good government. And at the end of the day, the rule of law still needs to hold in the United States of America. My next amendment is number 231. And this is based on a bill that Representative Liccardo and Representative Vindman and I have put forward the POCA bill, which would create a private right of action for violations of the Impoundment Control Act, potentially with the ability to sue perpetrators personally if they act in bad faith. And this is important because what we've seen right now is a blatant disregard for the rule of law by members of this administration, including Elon Musk, Big Balls, and the people involved with Doge. For too long, they have just sat there and decided that willy-nilly they're going to ignore the law, cut funding in ways that harms real people, including people I represent, people that you represent, and it's about time that we had accountability here. Okay, sure, I'm trying to. Okay, two more amendments here. My next amendment is very simple. This is number 232, no new tax cuts for Americans earning $100 million. And this would basically just say that there would be no new tax cuts for anyone making $100 million or more. My last amendment is number 285, and this would prohibit ICE agents from wearing masks and require them to identify themselves. We have seen in my district and across Southern California, ICE agents wearing jeans and sneakers and masks. They look more like gang members than they do like law enforcement agents, and they're jumping out of unmarked vans. It's hard to tell if they're actually law enforcement agents. It's about time that they adhere to the same standards that other law enforcement agents do. We don't see our local police masking up, hiding their identities, refusing to identify who they are. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. And I just have to say, thank you, Congressman Min and so many others around this table for the incredible thought leadership they have in all of these amendments and stepping forward to really make and fight for Americans across this country. Before I speak to the substance of my bills, I do have to again address and reiterate what many of my colleagues have said about the dangerous and immoral impact of the reconciliation package. To me and many of my constituents, it's just an abomination that this bill will make life worse and less affordable for working families, not only in the 6th District of Maryland, where I represent, but across the country. And again, it seems like it falls on deaf ears, but this bill will hurt Americans, and every district in America will feel its impact. Lately, yesterday, someone said, make America great. No, I think this is going to make America break. And I really think it is heartbreaking to see what's going to happen. Under this bill, more than 3 million people will lose access to food assistance, including over 2 million children. And again, this has fallen on deaf ears, and more than 17 million will be stripped, of course, of their health coverage for the next decade. And in the 6th District, many rural hospitals are really very fearful of closing. That 17 million people are denied life-saving care because of not what they've done or where they live or how little they earn, but it'll be because of what we do tomorrow in our votes. And to make matters worse, this bill represents a breathtaking act of fiscal hypocrisy. For decades, my Republican colleagues have raised the alarm of an increasing national debt and federal deficit, but they have tucked into this bill a $5 trillion debt ceiling hike with no offset, no pay for, and no common sense. This is not governing. It's a betrayal of public trust and a breach of our fiduciary duties to our constituents and to America. And don't just take my word for it. Let's listen to some of the Republican colleagues. Senator Tillis said that this would force states to consider eliminating Medicare coverage and cutting services for our most vulnerable. Senator Murkowski said we need more process and a better outcome for the American people about what this bill has to offer. And I joined Johnny Okowski on his amendment concerning that all states should be able to have some of these waivers or carve-outs, not the caribou carve-outs, but, let's figure out that there is something across this whole country that will protect us. And then rushing this means stripping health care and slashing services. And not one constituent in my district has wanted this to go forward. So I have several amendments, which I'm going to briefly go through. My first amendment is simple. It is Amendment 78, and it blocks any charges to nutrition policy under this bill unless there is a certification that no household with children under 18 will see their SNAP benefits cut. I shouldn't have to introduce this, but we are, because under this bill, over 2 million children will lose food assistance, and in my district, 1 in 9 households depend on SNAP. half of them with children. This isn't just about hunger. It's about dignity. It's about not going to school hungry and a right to live without worrying about where your next meal is from. The second, number 86, blocks the reckless cost sharing of SNAP from the federal government to states. It requires the Food and Nutrition Service, the Economic Research Service, and every SNAP agency in each state to certify that the change won't reduce benefits, shrink eligibility, or force states to cut their vital services. In Maryland alone, the state would have to absorb $75 million per year because that money would be pulled from other critical programs for low-income families. And some of my colleagues have spoken to this, but really there is a layering and a tsunami of cuts that's coming for rural America. Medicare, Medicaid, cuts, and potentially to Social Security as we look at our veteran services, but then with SNAP, and our states cannot handle it. And last, I'm going to say my amendment 993, I'm calling it the fiscal sanity circuit breaker. And that's what we need. It would block the bill from taking effect unless the Comptroller General certifies it will not increase the federal deficit by more than 2.5% per year. And it will look at economic impacts, including employment, investment, and GDP growth. Only by managing debt below the rate of long-term economic growth can the U.S. debt be sustainable. But the truth is, while Republicans talk tough about deficits, this bill easily adds over $3.3 trillion, and much more probably, and pairs deep cuts to food and health care with tax giveaways and a blank check $5 trillion debt ceiling hack. Mr. Norman, who I note is not here but is on the committee, tweeted, "It's not more spending and more if it's more spending and more deficit spending, it's a non-starter." Although I might not always align with my Republican colleagues, I appreciate that some of them on the other side are talking the talk and voting no, highlighting the need for fiscal responsibility. My fiscal sanity circuit breaker is common sense. If my colleagues truly believe in this bill, my amendments should not be a problem. And if they oppose them, then we should be honest about the harm that they are voting to inflict. To the parent wondering how they'll feed their child, to the state official staring at a financial cliff, and to the taxpayer tired of being misled by empty slogans and worried about our country's fiscal trajectory. That's who I'm fighting for. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support these amendments. Let's show the American people that this chamber can still act with decency, with honor, with honesty, and with courage. I urge support on them, and I will last say this vote will be one of the most important, if not the most consequential vote of our entire public service careers. This vote will follow us always. It will define us, our priorities, and our values, and our country will remember it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Representative Crockett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to the ranking member. I appreciate an opportunity, and I don't know that I'll have time to go through all 8 of my amendments, but I did submit 8. Amendments 121, 149, 196, 258, 314, 325, 342, and 355. I would respectfully ask that they all be ruled in order. Now, let me tell you why I'm here. I'm here fighting for people in my district because Republicans are willing to sell out working and struggling folks in my district, and frankly, there's two, to appease billionaires and big corporations. Now, I know we've had a lot of talk about how much SNAP costs a day, and the fact is that it's only $6 a day that a person gets when they get SNAP benefits, but we've not talked about the cost of Medicaid. It costs approximately $10 a day to ensure a kid gets health care through Medicaid. So we're talking about to take care of kids, let's say they've got SNAP and Medicaid, only $16 a day. But another thing we've not really put into perspective, we've talked about these billionaires, and we've talked about the fact that this is all to benefit them. No one has talked about how many billionaires we actually have in this country. We have more billionaires in the United States than any other country, but the total number is 83. Last time I checked, we have 435 members in the House, and we have 100 members in the Senate, yet somehow 83 people in this country have more representation than the hundreds of thousands that are about to lose their health care as well as their SNAP benefits. If I just started going through the Republicans that sit on this committee briefly, I would tell you that, Chairwoman, you have 112,000 people that are about to lose SNAP benefits just in your district. I would tell you that it is estimated in your state, as your senators stated, that roughly 651,982 would lose their health care, or I would tell Rep. Fishbach that 67,000 people on SNAP, and in the entire state of Minnesota, 173 would lose their health care. I could go on with these numbers, or I could tell you about the fact that even when we look at my state, and I know that Chip Roy sits on this committee, but he's not here right now, but we have 56,000 people that are on SNAP in his district, but in the entire state of Texas, we have 1.6 million people that may lose coverage. And somehow we have 83 billionaires. And somehow they have 535 people that are speaking up for them every single day to make sure that when they get married for a second or third or fourth time, that they can go ahead and have another $50 or $60 million wedding. Instead of protecting access to these programs, you're cutting them to help billionaires who pay less in taxes than some of the teachers in our country. You claim to want a tax system and budget that helps people, but that's impossible when you're subsidizing tax credits off of the folks who can't even afford to treat their kids or family to a nice meal because federal minimum wage hasn't gone up in 15 years. If y'all want to make a better system, then adopt my amendment number 314 that would require an increase in the federal minimum wage of $15 in order for corporate tax breaks to go into effect. Speaking of wages, this bill doesn't even give the same level of help to people living on tip wages and working overtime just to put food on this table as it does for Trump's billionaire buddies. In fact, the bill only allows no tax on tips and overtime until 2028, and we've talked about this. Listen, this is a joke. This was nothing more than a campaign scheme. This was about saying, you know what, I'm gonna make this promise to you. And we can talk about the fact that there have been a lot of promises made, yet a lot of promises broken. In fact, that was one of the reasons it seems like that, you know, Senator Tillis has decided that he's done and he's gonna get out because he understands that there's nothing but broken promises that are being made. Broken promises that look like, say, I'm going to deport the bad guys only, and then we end up with children with cancer or Americans or undocumented taxpayers that contribute more than $100 billion in taxes. Those are the ones being thrown in cages and sent to other countries. Or we look at the fact that there was a promise made and broken that Doge was supposed to be the magic trick. Now Elon is being threatened with deportation and the cancellation of his own contracts, which historically have been estimated at a whopping $38 billion after he decided that he was going to spill the tea about the Epstein files. And frankly, the truth is that we know that we could cut a lot of those contracts to Elon, but somehow that hasn't been done. Instead, we, the American people, have been left with the hefty tab of incompetence by Doge and feeling extremely vulnerable. In fact, there was a Doge employee who was fired, and I appreciate this man, but truly, transparency and truth has no place in this particular government. This former employee of Doge says that during his short time embedded with the Department of Veteran Affairs, he did not find levels of waste, fraud, and abuse that he had expected, and it was pretty surprised, actually, at how efficient government was. I will wrap up by saying this. I don't really understand what it is that y'all plan to go back and tell your constituents. I'm glad that some of y'all decided to show up, but the reality is that you have sold your constituents out for 83 people in this country. And each of our districts should have approximately 766,000 people. How is it that you can explain that we still are running up the credit card and we have nothing to show for it except for the fact that we won't have food on the tables and we won't have health care? And with that, I will yield.
Thank you. Representative Subramanian.
Thank you, Madam
recognized
Chair.
for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having this hearing and staying late tonight, and thank you to all the members of the committee. I want to just talk about a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of wasteful stuff in this bill. When you have a bill this big, you're going to end up with a lot of bad provisions that people may not hear about. And so a lot of my amendments are actually aimed at bad provisions or provisions that aren't there that should be there that are hurting Virginians and especially my region. These are amendments 108, 113, 144, 235, and 269. And the first one is a real whopper. I mean, because the Texas delegation in the Senate wanted to have their vote bought and paid for, they decided that they would actually spend hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money to take the space shuttle that's in Northern Virginia at the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian and move it all across country to the Space Center in Houston. Now, I actually grew up next to the Space Center in Houston, and they already have a full replica model of that space shuttle. They also have 6 other flight vehicles as well. So this isn't going to increase visits to the Space Center in Houston, where my family is. It's actually going to take away people's opportunity to, for free, see a space shuttle and show off American dominance in space for the past 50 years. And that's going to cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars just to buy a couple of votes in Texas. Next, for some reason, and no one's been able to explain it to me, last year the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, which owns the assets at Dulles Airport and DCA, which many members of Congress fly out of, actually renegotiated their lease with the federal government at a rate where they could afford to make improvements to those airports and make sure that we can also make flights affordable and airlines be able to use those facilities. And what happened is in this bill, we're actually blowing up a lot of those agreements, and we're doubling, in some cases, the amount that they have to pay, and that's going to be passed on to anyone who flies in and out of DCA and Dulles, and that includes all of you, all members of Congress in this room as well. And so that's going to cost everyone money, and certainly in my region, where we all fly out of Dulles and DCA, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and we have a toll road that is meant to pay off some of those expenses, and those tolls are going to go up on every single person who uses those tolls. I'm talking about the Dulles Toll Road. And so we have a lot of issues with the fact that we already have very high tolls in our region in Virginia, and they're just going to go up because of this bill, and no one's been able to explain to me why that is. And then finally, one of the president's branded golf courses is in my district, and he likes to come out there and golf, and that's fine, but then he golfs a lot, and I didn't realize this. He golfs almost more than 20% of his free time, his time actually, and not free time, his actual time, he's awake, is spent golfing. And he comes golfing so much that it's costing our region a lot of money, and it's costing our local sheriffs and local police a lot of money to make sure that that area is secure for his golf trips. And so what I'd really like to do is just make sure that we can at least reimburse my region for all the golf trips that the president is costing us. And so finally, there's a 9-figure slush fund for DOGE as well, and for Russell Vogt and the OMB. And no one's been able to explain to me why, to capture waste, fraud, and abuse, we need a 9-figure slush fund for them. Now, the last time I checked, some of the stuff that they were using money on was to set up sleeping pods in the GSA's building while firing half the people in that building. And so these are a lot of examples of waste and fraud. They hurt my region, but I can assure you that everyone can look through this bill, and I've read through most of it, if not all of it at this point, and you'll find that your region will be hurt by some of the waste in here. And the second thing I'll say is, I agree with this notion of this bill, this big, ugly bill being about broken promises. I mean, just look at what some of the stuff the president has said. He said about Medicaid and cuts to Medicaid, we're not going to touch it, right? And he said he would veto a bill that would cut Medicaid, and yet this bill kicks millions of American citizens off of Medicaid, 17 million, nearly 17 million. And he said that cuts to food assistance program are going to give everybody more food, but this bill puts 5 million people at risk of losing some or all of their food assistance. That includes 300,000 children in Virginia. And let's be clear, this bill is also going to make energy more expensive. He said that, the president said, we are going to get your energy prices down by 50%, but the studies have shown that this bill is going to spike energy costs up to $250 billion nationwide. In Virginia alone, we're going to see an 8% increase in energy costs. And finally, the biggest whopper of all is that this bill is supposedly going to reduce our deficit, and we know that that's not true. In fact, it's going to add $3 to $5 trillion to our national debt. It's going to hurt our deficit, and it's going to mortgage our children's future. This bill is bad. Our Virginians and Americans deserve better than these broken promises. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Sewell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member. My amendment would extend the Affordable Care Act's premium tax credit to Americans who are caught in the coverage gap, as well as Americans who will lose their Medicaid coverage as a result of this horrible bill. We must extend the premium tax credits for low-income citizens below 138% of the poverty line. I have heard from countless constituents who fall in the coverage gap, and they are desperate to keep their health care. I recently spoke with one of my constituents. Her name is Kiana, and Kiana was caught in the coverage gap. She lost her Medicaid coverage following the end of the COVID public health emergency. When she tried to qualify for Medicaid again, she was told that she made too much money. She made more than the $295 a month to qualify. In my state of Alabama, we have a bare bone Medicaid program. It's so bad that you have to really be P-O. You can't afford the O or the R. So people like Kiana are really scared about this cost shifting. The cost shifting will mean that Medicaid will not happen in the state of Alabama. The fact of the matter is they're not going to pay for it. They're just simply not going to pay for it. Madam Chair, I firmly oppose this so-called big, beautiful bill that has come to us from the Senate. Let me be clear, there's nothing beautiful about stripping health care from working families. There's nothing beautiful about taking food off the table of our most vulnerable neighbors. And there is certainly nothing beautiful about putting rural hospitals on life support. Madam Chair, this bill will gut Medicaid as we know it. It will slash funding for millions of children, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. Medicaid is a lifeline. It is a bill, this bill will cause 17 million Americans, including 170,000 Alabamians, to lose their health care. And it doesn't stop there. This bill will also gut SNAP benefits, a program that puts food on the table for hardworking families, for children who need breakfast before school, for seniors who are choosing between groceries and their medicine. In Alabama, it means 750,000 Alabamians could lose their nutrition benefits or worse, see them reduced. The cuts in this bill are not just numbers on a page. They are empty cupboards and shuttered clinics. There are hospital wings closed in small towns already struggling to keep their doors open. They are parents lying awake at night wondering how they're going to be able to afford medicine for a sick kid. We should be strengthening the safety net, not shredding it. We should be investing in the health care and well-being of our most precious commodity, our people, not ripping it away from them in order to pay tax cuts for billionaires. This bill is not a blueprint for prosperity. It is a roadmap for further inequality, for deeper poverty, for rural communities left to fend for themselves while the powerful walk away with more. Madam Chair, we were sent here to stand up for those people, not to abandon them. Let us stand together and reject this careless, heartless bill. Let us build something truly beautiful, an America where health care is a right, not a privilege for the few. A right. No child goes hungry and no community is left behind simply because of their zip code. I oppose this horrible bill, and I ask that my amendment, which will make it a little bit better, is considered by all. Thanks. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Sewell. Mr. Liccardo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have 4 amendments to H.R. 1, and I appreciate the committee's consideration. But rather than delving into the complexities of these amendments, I'd like to take a step back. I'd like to step back from whatever we're going to tell the public in press releases tomorrow if this bill passes. I'd like to talk about what we'll tell our children and our grandchildren a decade from now if this bill passes. The children who count on us, not just the ones in our homes, but all of America's children, will suffer immensely under this one big bloated borrowing bill. We are the grown-ups, but under this budget proposal, we're not governing like grown-ups. Grown-ups look out for kids, Grown-up governance recognizes the moral priority of our progeny. It emphasizes the imperative of taking the long view, of saving, of sacrificing, and investing today for our children's tomorrow. We have a fiduciary duty, indeed a sacred duty, to act in their best interest. You've heard from my colleagues how this bill cuts lifeline programs for our youth, from their health care and Medicaid to their school lunches and SNAP to their student aid and Pell Grants. But we're doing much worse than even that to our children. That is, we are spending their money and borrowing from their future to pay for our present. Now, many Americans could be forgiven for believing that with all these cuts, the GOP leadership must be proposing a budget that will actually reduce our monstrous $1.9 trillion deficit. But they would be wrong. The one big bloated borrowing bill will accelerate America's accumulation of debt by $3.9 trillion over the next decade if we include the interest payments according to the Nonpartisan Committee for Responsible Budgeting. Add another $1.4 trillion in new debt when Congress inevitably makes several of the temporary provisions of this bill permanent. Now, while congressional leaders may gaslight the public about the bill's true cost, nearly every independent expert, from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office to the Conservative Tax Foundation, knows better. The bill also hasn't fooled the markets. After we passed the less costly House version of this bill, only weeks ago, Moody's downgraded U.S. bonds in view of what they called, quote, current fiscal proposals. Wary bond investors have pushed bonds yields higher, and you can expect more of that in the years ahead, as we all pay a hidden tax from this bloated budget through higher interest rates. Now, I feel bad for my Republican colleagues. I know that President Trump painted each of them and all of Congress into a corner by publicly promising $5 trillion in tax giveaways he had no idea how to pay for. An even bigger problem is that Congress has no idea how to pay for those promises either. That's why this bill leaves, at best, $3.9 trillion of additional debt on the credit card. Now, I know that grown-up budgeting is hard. When I came into office as mayor for the 1 million residents of the city of San Jose, I faced nearly $4 billion in employee retirement debts that were crippling our city's budget, courtesy of politicians who were happy to make promises that they had no idea how to pay for. For more than a year, we spent hundreds of hours in difficult negotiations, but we forged an agreement that helped us save billions, helped us reactivate fire stations and hire police, and I left my successor with a $30 million surplus. We, Republicans and Democrats, could similarly negotiate a much better budget than this. Let's doge this bill, let's sit down and let's negotiate. I'd like to help my Republican colleagues to do what they know is right. When he realized that the Senate just added another $670 billion to the House's already bloated budget bill, Speaker Mike Johnson today told the media that, quote, I'm not happy with what the Senate did to our product. He shouldn't be happy, nor should any Republican member of this House. Let's fix this bill to make Speaker Johnson happier. Let's fix this bill for Republican Senator Murkowski, who today publicly urged us to do so. Let's fix it for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who today called it a shit show. Above all, let's fix this bill for our children. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you very much. Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What has been called a big and beautiful bill is as cruel and ominous a piece of legislation as I have ever seen in my many years on this earth. The big ugly bill cuts access to health care for 17 million Americans, so tens of thousands each year will die prematurely and will die preventable deaths because big shots in government want to give their multimillionaire and billionaire donors, like Jeff Bezos and those who attended his $50 million wedding in Venice, another huge tax cut. $3.8 billion in tax cuts, the lion's share going to folks like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and yes, the king of crypto, Donald Trump himself. While condemning the needy, to preventable disability and premature death, this cruel legislation also cuts funding for food to feed the needy. I would be ashamed of myself if I ever voted for something like this. I would not be able to live with myself enjoying my $174,000 a year salary and government-subsidized health insurance, while 17 million of my brothers and sisters lose their access to medical care, and 3 million hungry children and senior citizens go without food just so that folks can buy another super yacht. I'm here this evening to speak up for the least of these. On my way here today, that phrase came to mind, the least of these, and so I Googled it when I sat down in here. It took me to Matthew chapter 25, verse 40 through 45. And to paraphrase verse 41, for I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat, and I was sick, and you did not come look after me. I'm here this evening to speak up for the least of these. I'm here this evening because I'm deeply troubled by the big ugly bill which weaponizes the social safety net against those who need it most. Among its gravest failures is the omission of support for unaccompanied minors who are forced to navigate complex immigration proceedings without legal counsel, leaving kids, children, infants alone, frightened and unprotected in court. My amendment directly addresses this moral injustice by providing critical funding for appointed counsel, ensuring that children's rights are respected, their dignity is preserved, and justice is truly served. Through the crafting of this harmful Trump-appeasing bill, the Republicans, MAGA Republicans, have deliberately undermined Medicaid, with one senator dismissively claiming that concerned Americans would simply get over it. Such remarks reveal that they fully recognize how dangerous this bill weakens essential health care protections and will result in the unnecessary deaths of 500,000 people over the next 10 years. 500,000 of our brothers and sisters will lose their lives because of what MAGA Republicans are trying to do, just so that their donors can get another tax cut. Section 71-102 removes critical safeguards against coverage lockouts and annual and lifetime coverage limits, jeopardizing children's long-term health. Additionally, Section 71-119 imposes an unnecessary 80-hour work requirement that has consistently stripped coverage rather than promoting employment. You want sick, poor people living in rural America? I'll talk about rural America, not about those inner city rats that Senator Tuberville talked about. I'm going to talk about my brothers and sisters in rural America who would be forced to get up from their sick beds and find a way to get to town or out to the field so that they could find a job and work a minimum 20 hours a week, 4 hours a day, 5 days every week before they could become eligible for coverage that would enable them to get well so that they could work again. Healthcare should be a right and not a privilege in the wealthiest nation on earth, and access to a doctor must never be weaponized against the sickest of us. My amendments strike these harmful sections, restoring compassion, equity, and common sense to Medicaid. We watched as this bill rushed through under the cover of darkness, likely because it recklessly cuts critical funding without transparency. My amendment requires transparent public reporting, ensuring communities have visibility into how their resources are managed while protecting vital investments in climate resilience. Lastly, Madam Chair, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me, is Matthew 25, verse 45. I think we should all keep that in mind as we go about our business today. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I think most of us on our side of the aisle think about those verses and others every single day. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. McGovern.
First, I request unanimous consent to insert a statement from Representative Houlihan in support of 4 amendments, number 8, 19, 28, and 37. Taken together, these amendments would make significant progress in ensuring that this legislation will not harm Americans across the country.
Without objection.
And I just want to thank all of the panelists for being here. I mean, I support all of your amendments. I share your concerns. I mean, I really am deeply disturbed by the fact that this is a bill that's going to hurt the most vulnerable in our country, and it could reward those who are well off and well connected. If we are lucky enough to be in the majority again, I hope one of the things that we will look seriously into is honest-to-goodness campaign finance reform, because there's too much damn money in politics. And you look at some of these provisions, and you can tie it directly to contributions. And I don't think that's what the American people want, and that's what has corrupted the system. But I have no questions. I just want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Scott.
My colleague from Georgia, those of us in rural Georgia would appreciate if y'all would stop cutting our forest lands down and maybe come get those solar panels off our farmland and take them back up there to Metro Atlanta. We'd be appreciative of that. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Just want to thank all of the panel members for their thoughtful amendments, for their testimony, for their patience in waiting to testify tonight. I think collectively, you've told quite the story of both the harm to our communities that this ugly bill will inflict, as well as the real hypocrisy and the real underlying purposes for why these cuts are being made to justify giving to those who have the most rather than those who need the most. So thank you. Appreciate all of you. I yield back.
Mr. Jack.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Thank you very much to the panel once again. And I'm, ditto on everything that was said and everything you said. Something that we haven't talked a lot about, and we have a Ways and Means member here. And, Ways and Means, right? And the means or the ways is how do we get tax revenue? And I just wanted to ask a really quick question because it seems that the tax cuts are one thing, but we also, under Trump and this administration and the budgets, really seen an opening door for the tax cheats, right? And right now, it's the estimate that the cuts to the IRS are going to lead to $1 trillion in revenue loss, $1 trillion in revenue loss. There's already been a $500 billion shortfall in what we got from last year. Like, we don't have to cut Medicaid and SNAP and everything else if we would just make sure we made people pay their taxes. Madam Chair, I'd like to enter into the record Trump pardoned tax cheat after mother attended $1 million dinner from May 26, 2025.
Without objection.
And Representative Sewell, I think that this issue goes to the ranking members of there's way too much campaign money flowing in so that tax cheats can get away with stuff. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I do. Obviously, I think our budget is a reflection of what we value. And our tax code is a reflection of what we value as well. I think that the fact that we are willing to cut IRS service the fact that we would be willing to cut IRS service workers by such a big amount, I think it was $700 million they're going to take away, means that we don't have the agents to go in there to find these tax cheats. Instead, I've seen in my district, the low-hanging fruit is to question someone's child tax credit or earned income tax credit, not to go after all of the complicated tax, things that would really bring us a lot of money and a lot of revenue, to your point. we wouldn't have to cut so much of our Medicaid if we just taxed the very wealthy and them pay their tax, not figure out ways and loopholes not to pay their taxes. And so, you know, in terms of campaign finance, I think that the article that you submitted to the record is really atrocious. It was a person who was convicted as a January 6th rioter and literally was able to get a pardon after his mother paid $1 million to go to Mar-a-Lago and attend a $1 million per person dinner with our president. And miraculously, 3 weeks later, that person was given a pardon. And this person not only was January 6th, but also defrauded the government, is what he did. He defrauded the government millions and millions of dollars. Medicaid, absolutely. So, look, I think that all of us here today have submitted amendments that we think will make this bill better, but the fact of the matter is it's a horrible bill. And the American people know it. Over 60% of them don't agree about the bill. And I think that we as lawmakers should really be putting the people first. And I think that the power of the people should be more important than the people with power. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. I thank our witnesses for being here, and I'm going to call up, you all are excused. Let's see if we can work this again. Mr. Takano, you're in the first seat. Mr. Amo, Congresswoman Morrison, Congresswoman Ansari, Congressman Espaillat, Williams, Bonamici, Goodlander. You're close, Suzanne. You didn't have to move far. You might. Thank you all for being here. Your written comments may be submitted for the record, and I ask you to keep your spoken comments to 5 minutes. Mr. Takano, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This 900-page bill is a travesty and a gut punch. It puts the interests of the richest and most connected billionaires, polluters, and tech companies over every other American who is just trying to get by. It decimates health care. It literally takes food off the table of the vulnerable, and it even stoops so low that it actively harms veterans. This big, ugly betrayal undermines our shared American values and allows this administration to continue its brazen efforts to strip our great nation for parts to be auctioned to the highest bidders. And it boggles the mind that the Republican Party wants to deny 17 million people health care. Republicans have chosen to decimate health care infrastructure in rural and underserved communities. Republicans have chosen to harm seniors by forcing them to choose between basic necessities and health care. Republicans have chosen to callously hurt disabled people who need long-term care. No one is spared from this monument to greed. And that includes veterans. To allow my colleagues a modicum of course correction, I'm offering several amendments to try and blunt the impact of this devastating billionaire handout, to blunt the impact on our veterans. First, I've introduced an amendment to exempt veterans from the new Medicaid work requirements. This is something that Senator Murkowski tried to achieve for all the people of Alaska. She only was able to achieve waivers of work requirements for SNAP recipients, but she did indeed she was concerned about both. And it was because of the obstrusities of the Byrd rule and the workarounds that they could not achieve that. But nevertheless, her concern is something that I think all Americans should also share, that these terrible work requirements that are really, as my colleague Sarah McBride called them, trickle-down cruelty, a golden shower of benefit cuts. You're trying to impose this paperwork, this intended inefficiency, intended government inefficiency in order to cause people to not get their benefits because we'll just lose many, many people through the cracks. Currently, 1.6 million veterans rely on Medicaid. And while the bill may exempt veterans with 100% VA disability ratings, it would still subject many as 1 million other veterans to bureaucratic red tape just to keep their health care. We shouldn't be doing this to our veterans. We shouldn't be doing this to anybody who is going through a complicated set of life experiences, whether it might be taking care of a loved one, being a caregiver, or any number of different things that we could imagine. People who are lower income are facing tremendous life choices, and our veterans, we can all imagine what sorts of trials and tribulations our veterans are going through. Veterans with disability ratings other than 100% may still have service-connected disabilities that present significant impairments to employment. Singling out veterans with 100% disability ratings is not reform, it's cruelty. Our veterans have sacrificed enough at the altar of freedom. We should not be forcing them to sacrifice even more. Second, if you're going to rip away veterans' health care, the least we should do is tell them. My amendment would require HHS to notify veterans who are losing Medicaid coverage due to this bill. Third, I've offered a similar amendment requiring USDA to notify veterans and service members if they're being kicked off of SNAP. Over 1.2 million veterans live in households that receive food assistance through SNAP. Again, this bill takes away from those who served and gives to those who stockpile wealth without sacrifice. And if I had had enough imagination, I would have offered an amendment to provide a waiver to our veterans who are on SNAP in the way that Senator Murkowski was able to get a waiver for the people of Alaska, got the waiver for those work requirements for those Alaskans who are in need of SNAP. We should have done the same for our veterans. Fourth and fifth, I propose creating websites through HHS and USDA to help veterans navigate the fallout, to provide information about alternative health care and nutrition resources for those losing Medicaid and SNAP coverage. It's a modest effort to clean up the mess this bill creates. I also have an amendment that would strike the bill's decade-long delay of the 2023 Borrower Defense Rule implementation, a consumer protection rule that provides loan relief to borrowers who have been defrauded by their colleges. Student loan borrowers should not be forced to repay loans for classes or degrees from schools that have lied to, deceived, or misled them. This delay makes it significantly harder for student borrowers to make a successful claim when they are victims of misconduct and cuts predatory institutions and loan services a break instead of pushing students to and over the brink of default, which devastates individuals, their families, and taxpayers. We should not be paying for tax breaks for the wealthy by making students have to pay on their loans that they have been defrauded on by these for-profit monstrosities, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, members of the committee. I honestly can't believe that I'm sitting here today again to try to convince my Republican colleagues that it's immoral to sell off the health of the American people in order to cut taxes for multimillionaires and billionaires. But that's exactly what the Republicans' big, beautiful bill does. Unfortunately, the Republicans' budget is even worse than the last time I sat here before this committee and pleaded with the Republicans to not make the largest cut to Medicaid in our nation's history and upend our nation's healthcare system. But here we are discussing this bill yet again, and the cuts are even bigger, and the impact on our healthcare will be even worse. The Republicans' budget is a betrayal of the American people. It is the largest cut to Medicaid in our nation's history, $1.1 trillion in healthcare cuts. It will kick 17 million Americans off their health insurance. It will force hospitals to shut down. It will force nursing homes to shut down. It will restrict access to reproductive health care. It will increase health care costs. It will increase premiums. It will increase out-of-pocket costs. It will make more families go bankrupt from medical debt. It will cripple our nation's health. And that's not even getting into any of the rest of the disaster of this bill. The largest cut to food assistance in our nation's history, killing more jobs in one single bill than ever before in history, increasing consumer energy costs, raising property taxes in all 87 counties of my home state, exploding the national debt. The list goes on. But I'm a doctor, and I'm thinking about people's health, and today I want to talk about the unconscionable disaster this bill is for Americans' health and our nation's healthcare system. One thing I want every single American to know is that even if you don't use Medicaid, even if you don't know anyone who uses Medicaid, the Republican budget will affect you too. It doesn't matter what insurance you have when your local hospital closes. And with this budget, hospitals will close, clinics will close. This will be a catastrophe for all of us. We will all have less access to health care. It's incredibly dangerous. But I don't want us to lose sight of the human impact of this. As this bill gets closer to becoming the law of the land, I can't stop thinking about my patients. I see their faces, the faces of the mothers and the families I've taken care of who got their health insurance through Medicaid. Do they not matter? Are they somehow less important? Where are they supposed to go to get health care? 80 million Americans get their health insurance through Medicaid. Almost half of all American children get their coverage through Medicaid. What are you doing? Where is your humanity? What is the most chilling and soul-crushing part of this entire process is that the Republican majority doesn't care. They don't care. And this isn't speculative. It isn't being presumptuous or guessing about their intentions. They are literally telling us. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, called gutting Medicaid minutia and kicking millions of Americans off their health insurance immaterial. Republican Senator Mitch McConnell said Americans who are concerned about losing Medicaid will, quote, get over it. Republican Senator Joni Ernst defended the life-threatening gutting of Medicaid by saying, well, we're all going to die. As we sit here today, I am outraged by what Republicans are doing to future generations. I never want to hear Republicans say that they are the party of families ever again. Half of all children in the United States of America get their health care coverage through Medicaid. 1 in every 4 children in the United States of America get food assistance through SNAP. Republicans are taking away health care and food from our children in order to prioritize billionaires and perpetuate wealth inequality. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's unconscionable. We haven't even begun to unpack all the ways in which this bill is a moral abomination and honestly an embarrassment of a piece of legislation. If you were serious about putting together a good budget for the American people, you wouldn't try to shove it through on an artificial deadline. You wouldn't force debate through the dark cover of night. You wouldn't vote on it without even reading the text of the bill. But the Republican majority is just unquestioningly doing the president's bidding. They have ceded all of their power to the president, who is beholden to his billionaire class. The more the American people learn about this bill, the more they hate it. You've seen the polls, you've received the calls and emails. You know the American people don't want it. That's why I'm submitting an amendment to scrap the whole bill. Listen to the people you were sent here to represent. So let's start over, write a bill for the American people, not the billionaires. Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Amo, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member and distinguished members of this committee.
Look, we all know the saying. We've heard it a bunch of times today, probably. Budgets are a statement of values. You know, this has guided me through this process, this long process that we've been on, and a big, bad process I think it's been. 126 days ago in February, 82 days ago in April, and 40 days ago in May, the House voted on some form of this Republican scheme that would take the health care and food assistance away from millions to pay for tax breaks for the rich. Republican members in this chamber have had opportunity after opportunity to debate how to avoid hurting millions of people. You've had a chance, countless chances to improve this bill, to state values. From the Budget Committee to the Rules Committee, I've been sounding the alarm alongside my Democratic colleagues. You know, we pulled a college-style all-nighter to demand Republicans listen to these values we share, values that I hear at home in Rhode Island. Yet, here we are, July 1st, 2025, once again voting on this big, bad bill for billionaires. Has it gotten any better? Nope. Republicans have undoubtedly made it worse. And every step of the way, every vote we've taken, every debate they've participated in, Republicans have been faced with a question. Does this budget reflect your values? And every single time, whether or not they've said it, they've answered with a resounding yes. Republicans value the wealthy over the working class. Republicans value tax breaks for billionaires over health care for the vulnerable. Time and time again, Republicans have refused to correct this reverse Robin Hood scheme. And I proudly voted no over and over in committee and on the floor, but Republicans refuse to join us. And we'll try, I guess, through this process to make this bad blueprint to bolster billionaires a little less bad. Republicans are stealing from the poor to give to the rich, period. It's immoral. And as such, I've introduced an amendment, Amendment 139, to raise the top tax rate back to 39.6%. This amendment fulfills a request from President Trump himself months ago. I'm not sure he knew what he was doing when he put it out there, but he called for raising taxes on millionaires. Let's do it. This bill also pushes the dream of higher education further out of reach for millions of Americans. So I introduced Amendment 130. I think it originally saw light in the Senate with one of my home state senators, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, to index the maximum Pell Grant to inflation. This amendment honors the legacy of a great Rhode Islander, Senator Claiborne Pell, by ensuring vulnerable Americans and Rhode Islanders and students throughout the country can climb the ladder of success. This bill would rip away health insurance from nearly 17 million Americans. I introduced Amendment 96 to block implementation of these dangerous policies until we confirm and have certainty that Medicaid enrollees won't lose coverage. Pretty common sense. We've heard over and over and over again, this bill does not take Medicaid away from a single person. Well, after all of that insistence, if you pass this amendment, you will make it the case that not a single person will lose coverage. This is a common sense amendment. But let's be very clear, with no ambiguity, this bill takes 17 million Americans off of Medicaid, no matter how you slice it. Now, we also know that this bill would gut the tax policies that spurred a clean energy boom throughout the country. This will increase Rhode Islanders, people in the Northeast, people across this country already sky-high energy bills and eliminate thousands of jobs. So I introduced Amendment 106. I know this also was led in the Senate by another one of my senators, Jack Reed, and it blocks bad policies from taking effect until we confirm electricity prices will not be increased for any American household. Make a commitment to the American people that the priorities that Republicans have put forth for months and months and months that they've articulated actually have a potential of seeing the light of day. But I don't think that will be the case. And this bill would eliminate two taxes on gun silencers, short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns. This would make Americans less safe from gun violence and cost $1.7 billion over 10 years. There is no better definition of a lose-lose. And yet, this found its way into this big, ugly bill. So I'm proud to co-lead Congressman Mike Thompson's Amendment 146, which would strike this dangerous and expensive provision. These amendments won't solve everything. They will blunt the brunt of the big bad bill's betrayal for the American people. So I'll leave you with this. This bill is worse now. I'm an emphatic hell no, and I beg you, vote no. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Ansari, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since 8 a.m. this morning, I have been leading a read-in for our future, joined by students, joined by labor unions, joined by advocates, other members of Congress, to read the almost 1,000 pages of the big, ugly bill and expose just how cruel and egregious it is. I have spent all day hosting readers for this. We started outside the Capitol. Now people are still downstairs trying to get through this bill, and it still is going to take another couple of hours. So to my Republican colleagues, I have a genuine question for you. I'm sure all of your constituents would like to know, have you read this bill? I mean, have you taken the time to even try to look at it, try to skim it? I mean, new text came out today. And if you have, does all of us being here right now, sitting here, mean that you're okay with everything that's in it? Are you okay with millions of people losing their health care as a result of this bill? Are you okay with people losing their homes as a result of this bill? Are you okay with millions of jobs being lost because of the clean energy rollbacks? Are you okay with billions of dollars going to ICE to rip families away from one another, to allow and enable Donald Trump to continue to break the law and to cement himself as a dictator of what is now an authoritarian regime? Either way, honestly, I don't know which one is worse, but I know that either way, your constituents and Americans deserve so much better than this. I'm here today offering 9 amendments to mitigate the drastic impacts that this bill would have in this country. I would like to highlight 3 of those amendments. My first amendment would prevent the natural resources title of this bill from taking effect until all subsidies for the fossil fuel industry are eliminated from the federal government. By even the most conservative estimates, the federal government gives $20.5 billion of fossil fuel subsidies to big oil annually. But Americans are not getting a fair return on their investment. In fiscal year 2022, direct subsidies to big oil exceeded revenue by $2.1 billion. Beyond dollars, the human toll of the climate crisis is staggering. Extreme heat, which is a deadly issue in my district, is already claiming 1,300 lives annually. By the way, extreme heat actually kills more people than tornadoes, floods, and the majority of natural disasters combined. Researchers estimate that if we continue to heavily rely on fossil fuels, extreme heat deaths could rise to 26,575 lives lost annually. We have to turn away from fossil fuels. They're a bad investment for our future, both from a fiscal and a human health perspective. I'm also offering an amendment that would require the Secretary of Interior and Comptroller General to ensure that this bill would not result in increased energy costs for Americans. Instead of investing in clean, renewable energy, Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are using this big, ugly bill to continue giving handouts to big oil and fossil fuel polluters at the expense of working families. I serve on the Natural Resources Committee. We have had a number of hearings titled Unleashing American Energy Dominance. But then when you get into the weeds of it, there's no discussion of renewable energy. There's all of this talk about unleashing oil and gas all across the country when we already produce more oil and gas than any country in the world at any point in our history. At a time when energy prices are soaring and so many Americans are struggling to pay their bills, the last thing that we should be doing is enacting policies that will increase energy prices even further. Unfortunately, that's exactly what this bill does. If my Republican colleagues are serious about lowering costs for Americans, they should have no problem supporting my amendment to ensure that this bill does not result in higher energy costs before it takes effect. And lastly, I'm submitting an amendment that would utilize any alleged savings made by cuts to education funding to fill budget shortfalls in the Pell Grant program. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the Pell Grant program will have a shortfall of about $2.7 billion at the end of fiscal year 2025, which would widen to $9.9 billion by the end of 2026. It would then widen by $7 billion every year. This big ugly bill tries to solve this problem by stripping Pell Grant eligibility from single parents and workers who need to go to school part-time. Pell Grants make getting a degree possible for people, for rural families, working families, students who are the first in their families to ever be able to go to college. These are future teachers and nurses and doctors and innovators. We cannot make school even more unaffordable and out of reach for them. This bill is a massive step backward for our future. It sells out our communities, guts our healthcare, and slashes programs that millions of Americans depend on. Letting this bill pass will be a death sentence for many in this country. And the fact that you can all sit here so callously, not caring at all, and doing whatever it is that Donald Trump tells you to do is disgusting. I yield back.
Representative Espaillat, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. The American people will probably see this exercise and consider it to be an exercise in futility, that dozens of members of Congress come before this committee, they present meritorious amendments to make this bill better, and they're not heard. But in fact, I don't feel that. It is a collective testimony of where we stand on this bill. And this bill does not live up to the promises that Republicans made to the American people. Americans were told once, twice, 3 times, forever that Medicaid was safe from cuts. Instead, we see provisions that will cause millions of Americans to lose their health care and millions more to pay higher premiums and copays. Americans were told that Republicans were putting power back in the hands of states, but we see policies that would attempt to control how states decide to use their own state funding. Americans were told that this bill will reduce the deficit and restore the middle class. And yet we see instead this bill would allow for millions in tax cuts to the very wealthy and add trillions of dollars to the national debt. So this is a collective testimony that we're putting forward today that shows how the Republican Party has failed the American people. And several hundred amendments have been brought forward, including 112 amendments from members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which I'm proud to chair. I have introduced 3 amendments, Madam Chair. Amendment 312 will require a study on how Medicaid cuts will impact safety net hospitals and federally qualified health centers that provide services to medically underserved communities. Now, that's so important because they will get disproportionately hurt by these cuts. These safety net hospitals will potentially have to close. And so we must measure the level of hurt that this betrayal will perpetrate against the American people. Medicaid cuts are not just obviously harmful to patients, but they are also detrimental to healthcare facilities that predominantly serve Medicaid and Medicare recipients. Now, I have 488,000 Medicaid recipients in my district. This will severely hurt more than half, much more than half of the district. Many of them are seniors, children, women that relied on Medicaid and will see this program gutted. In the district, there are 18 funded healthcare centers, federally funded healthcare centers that provide services to over 1 million people every year. So this will devastate the district, this will devastate the country, but ultimately, this is a collective testimony that we're putting forward that unmasks the betrayal of the Republican Party to the American people on the pledges that you made, that you would not cut Medicaid. And in fact, we're seeing that you're devastating it. I've also introduced Amendment 282, which will require also a study on SNAP cuts. The biggest cuts in SNAP history. Yeah, this bill is big, all right. It's the biggest cut in healthcare in the history of our country. It's the biggest cut in food stamps in the history of our country. And it's the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the richest in America. So this bill is big, all right, in those three categories. And the cuts in SNAP will not only hurt recipients, but it will hurt small businesses, grocery stores, bodega owners that rely, in many cases, 50% of their business is through food stamps, the SNAP program. So they will be hurt. Small businesses, grocers, not just in cities, but in rural areas as well. And finally, Madam Chair, I have Amendment 320, which will prohibit funds from being used to conduct immigration enforcement in houses of worship, in churches, in synagogues and temples across America. You should not be afraid to be arrested and deported when you go pray to your God. 65% of the American people believe so. These are the three amendments. People don't want this bill. I urge the adoption of the amendments. And I yield back.
Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for being here to listen to us after a very long day. Y'all, I'm at the Rules Committee for the second time this Congress to try and fix the billionaire bailout budget, the most expensive single bill in American history, transferring wealth from working people to billionaires. I thought back in May that this bill just couldn't get any worse, but the Senate said, just wait, and they actually proved me wrong because the bill is actually worse. The first time the House debated and passed this bill, my Republican colleagues tried to hide it from the American people, debating it in the middle of the night, hoping that folks back home wouldn't notice what they were doing. This time, their cruelty has been on display in broad daylight all day long. My Republican colleagues are forcing a bill through that, Madam Chair, most of your colleagues haven't read this bill. They're voting to take food from the mouths of millions of families without even reading the bill. Democrats and Republican families alike who rely on SNAP, and y'all need to understand that the reliance on SNAP and the strain on food banks, they serve meals to millions across this country, not my constituents, but across all districts. When SNAP is slashed, food banks feel the pain in real time. Higher demand, increased strain on volunteers and donated supplies. This would make a bad situation worse for food banks across the country, including the Atlanta Community Food Bank in my district, which is already struggling after a $15 million funding cut following the defunding of local food purchase assistant cooperative agreement programs under this Republican administration. But I need to be clear, just because the Atlanta Community Food Bank is headquartered in my district, it serves 14 districts across the state. I was hoping that my colleagues from Georgia would have been here when I had an opportunity to speak, because in the 3rd Congressional District of Georgia, the Atlanta Community